All right, everybody, welcome to the show. I am all over the map today, so we're going to jump into a whole bunch of stuff. Biden and the Republicans are fighting over the debt ceiling. Is it really a fight? As you can tell by the air quotes, I think not. Biden is already snubbing his nose at progressives who have proposed the obvious solution on this debt ceiling thing. Don't worry, I'll break it all down for you if you're not, sure what the debt ceiling is or why this matters. We'll jump into all of that. We also have Fox News getting caught red-handed spreading a viral fake news story. Now, when I say it's fake news, I mean that this story was completely and utterly fabricated, made up out of whole cloth to push a political agenda. They look ridiculous after pushing this. We actually happen to know even the specifics as to who made up this story, just how insane the lies are. So we'll dive into all of that. And then later on in the show, we have Marianne Williamson delivers an unbelievable speech where she basically says, I'm running on reviving FDR's dream of a new Bill of Rights, an economic Bill of Rights. I'm not kidding when I say I literally couldn't ask for anything more from a presidential candidate. This is exactly the kind of ideology and philosophy that's right up my alley, but the media is nowhere to be found. I mean, nobody has covered it. It's beyond disrespectful. It's negligent. They're not doing their jobs, because this is something that if the American people knew this was on the menu, this is an option, she'd have much, much higher support. So we'll dive into that and much more. All right, so without further ado, shameless plugs. You guys know the drill. Everybody click like, click subscribe. We're trying to get to 2 million now. We just crossed that 1 million mark recently. You guys can listen to the full show on Spotify if you'd like. We post the audio version of the podcast over on Spotify. If you don't want to go video for video on YouTube, you can do that. And remember, I never talk to advertisers, never talk to corporations, so please consider supporting the show, even if it's just $2 a month or whatever, on Patreon, link below. Support Crystal Kyle and Friends on Substack, link below. And you could even tip on YouTube now, which is a nice little feature that they added relatively recently. So there's an article here in Politico talking about the debt ceiling fight. Now, for those of you who are longtime political junkies, you know that every couple of years or so, we have this debt ceiling fight. So what is the debt ceiling? Well, the debt ceiling is just an arbitrary cap on our debt. And the reason I call it arbitrary is because it's made up. And also, this fight is about money that we've already spent. So basically, there is no real fight. The question is, hey, is the United States going to continue to allow everybody to view us with full faith and confidence and have full faith and credit in the U.S. government? If we don't address this situation, we're talking about a situation where we enter a depression here in the U.S. and could even spark a worldwide recession or depression. I know that sounds hyperbolic, but it is definitely accurate. You know, the dollar is the world reserve currency, at least at this moment. I don't know how long that's going to last, right? And this is not something, you're playing with fire. You're playing with fire. And the overwhelming majority of countries don't have a debt limit because it's unnecessary and it would only cause chaos, as we're currently going through right now. And so the Republicans are using this to try to extract concessions. Now, the things that they want, you're not going to be surprised to hear this, are a cut in virtually every single program that helps the poor and the working class. That's what they want. They want like work requirements for food stamps, or as it's now called, the SNAP program. They basically want to take a hatchet. They wanted a 22% cut across the board on government spending for regular people. That's what they wanted. Originally, they wanted to cut Medicaid and Social Security and Medicare as well, but they ran into a brick wall on that front. That brick wall was called Joe Biden and Donald Trump being united on an issue. So they're trying to find other ways to cut the federal budget to screw working people. And Biden has decided, I will now go ahead and negotiate in good faith with these people. Now, why is that a mistake? It's a mistake because their position is colossally unpopular, and they're not going to stop until they get everything they want. So cutting a deal with them is basically Biden turning his back on his own constituents and his own voters who he made promises to. Now, the plot thickens because Biden has a number of things he could do just on his own to circumvent this crisis. In fact, it's not even a crisis. This is This is a crisis of their own making. Biden can effectively turn around, and one idea that's been floated is print a coin that's worth $1 trillion, and then that ends the crisis on its own. Of course, since the U.S., we have our own sovereign currency, and this is something Trump even pointed out accurately. When you have your own sovereign currency, you could just print money. You just print money and subvert this crisis. So that's one way he can approach it. Another thing people have floated, and honestly, I think this idea is better, is use the 14th Amendment to basically abolish the debt ceiling. And there's specific wording in the 14th Amendment that pretty unequivocally gives the president the ability to say, we're not going through this anymore. We're done. We're done. So, of course, Biden prematurely decides, let me take all of the options where I can do it unilaterally off the table. Oh my God. Oh, Joe, what are you doing? What are you doing? And in the process of doing that, he also disrespects the base of his own party and the progressive wing. So this is in Politico. They say Biden's 14th Amendment message to progressives, it ain't gonna happen. The president's advisors fear such a move would trigger a legal battle, undermine global faith in U.S. creditworthiness, and damage the economy. All right, so let's break this down one by one here. Would it trigger a legal battle? It absolutely would. But guess what? In the meantime, you wouldn't have a debt ceiling. So go ahead, let the courts fight it out. Let it go to the courts. But in the meantime, there's no crisis because the debt ceiling has effectively been abolished. So that's point number one. Now, maybe down the road they change it, but I tend to doubt that, and I'll explain why in a second. It would undermine global faith in U.S. creditworthiness. Well, you know what would do that even more? If we plunge into this unknown territory of crossing the debt limit. Because it looks unlikely that we're going to get some sort of a deal, right? Certainly a deal that could hold the House, the Senate, Biden, and Republicans together. So what would undermine global faith in U.S. creditworthiness is not doing this. That would undermine it more. Doing this would, even if you say it's a bad option, it is definitely a less bad option. And then they say it would damage the economy. Well, again, what would damage the economy more? Not doing it would damage the economy more. Now, also, by the way, just the idea that it's going to trigger a legal battle and they're going to fight it through the courts, the one consistent with our court system is the overwhelming majority of the time, they side with capital. Now, guess what? This is a rare instance where capital doesn't want the chaos. They don't want this debt limit fight. They don't want to risk plunging into a global recession and or depression. And so would the courts really snub their nose up at basically capital united in this country? I tend to doubt it. Okay, so here's what they say. Progressive lawmakers renewed their call for President Joe Biden to bypass Congress to avert a default after the abrupt cancellation of debt ceiling talks on Friday. But the White House remains resistant. It issued a subdued statement indicating it sees no reason to pull the plug on talks. And privately, its message has been even blunter. So what they're referring to here is a bunch of progressive lawmakers signed a letter to President Biden and said, hey, let's stop messing around with this thing. Are you crazy? Let's go ahead and just lift the debt ceiling using the 14th Amendment. And Biden's reaction is, I know what you're talking about. We're working with the Republicans and everything will come to pass. Everything will be smooth. Well, if you look at their demands, it is by definition not smooth, because even if you give in to 20% of their demands, you're screwing your own base and the country. Senior Biden officials have told progressive activists and lawmakers in recent days that they do not see the 14th Amendment, which says, listen to this, guys, this is really something. The validity of the public debt cannot be questioned. So in other words, the whole idea of this arbitrary debt ceiling is unconstitutional. So you have a conflict in our laws. You have a conflict in, hey, here's what the Supreme Court says, or excuse me, here's what the Constitution says, and here's what, a federal law says. So there's a conflict there. So Biden gets to choose which law he thinks is going to be the law of the land. That would be an easy way to handle this. I mean, that wording is pretty straightforward. The validity of the public debt cannot be questioned. And he's saying, take that off the table. It's unbelievable. As a viable means of circumventing debt ceiling negotiations. They have argued that doing so would be risky and destabilizing, according to 3 people familiar with the discussions. Again, this is maddening because what's more destabilizing is not using the 14th Amendment. The White House has studied the issue for months, oh please, with some aides concluding that Biden would likely have the authority to declare the debt limit unconstitutional as a last-ditch way to sidestep default. But Biden advisors have told progressives that they see it as a poor option overall, fearing such a move would trigger a pitched legal battle, undermine global faith in U.S. creditworthiness, and damage the economy. We already addressed every single one of those points, and every single one of those points fails. Officials have warned that even the appearance of more seriously considering the 14th Amendment could blow up talks that are already quite delicate. Good! That is literally exactly what we want. That's exactly what we want. We want to blow up the talks. Why? Because the Republicans are being unreasonable. They're asking for things that are wildly unpopular and terrible for the country. Quote, they have not ruled it out, said one advisor to the White House, granted anonymity to speak candidly about discussions, but it is not currently part of the plan. The administration's deep skepticism of the 14th Amendment as a workable off-ramp further heightens the stakes surrounding the debt ceiling talks after negotiators briefly walked away from the table on Friday. Guys, this is Joe Biden having Washington, D.C. brain. I mean, he's been there since roughly 1789, and in his mind, it's like, what do you mean? Our honorable Republicans and Democrats will work together for the good of the country. That's not the way it works anymore. If it ever did, by the way. If it ever worked this way. But look, either he has Washington brain or he kind of secretly wants the cuts to stuff like the food stamp program. Or maybe it's both. He likes this Washington insider game and he's kind of cool with cuts to certain social safety net programs. Or else they wouldn't be on the table now, would they? The White House has acknowledged that the two sides had hit an impasse and Republican cited disagreements over the level of spending restrictions as a major sticking point. But the president's team reiterated the need to eventually find an agreement. Quote, there are real differences between the parties on budget issues and talks will be difficult, a White House official said. The president's team is working hard toward a reasonable bipartisan solution that can pass the House and the Senate. Biden himself has said that he sees a bipartisan deal as the only option to the current standoff, casting doubt on the 14th Amendment as workable in public remarks. But the private resistance being registered by his aides has frustrated progressives who worry the president is too readily giving up his leverage. It also threatens to fracture months of party unity behind Biden's debt ceiling strategy, exposing the White House to increasingly vocal criticism just as it enters the final stage of its high-stakes standoff with the GOP. So, by the way, Biden has said publicly, I'm not negotiating. I'm not going to negotiate. These people are being unreasonable. And then secretly, privately, he's like, let's negotiate. No, what you're saying publicly is actually correct, and you should stick by that. Quote, I think Biden is actually flirting dangerously with a backlash among his own supporters. Oh, you don't say. You don't say, said Robert Hockett, a Cornell University law professor close to progressive lawmakers who has advocated for ways that Biden can take unilateral action. Top White House aides have largely dismissed the rising angst among progressives and other allies who feel left out of debt talks. Instead, the administration has effectively gone all in on a debt ceiling and budget agreement with Republicans that officials hoped to finalize as early as Sunday, the people familiar with the discussion said. Well, that didn't happen. There's no deal. It is now Monday. There's no deal. That would allow Biden to clinch the deal shortly after returning from the G7 summit in Japan and give congressional leaders in both parties several days to lock down the votes needed to push through a debt ceiling increase. Momentum appeared to slow on Friday after negotiators broke camp without plans for a next sit-down. So there were times in these negotiations where Biden was like, look, you want to cut spending? Fine, let's cut spending. We'll totally freeze military spending at the level it is right now. And Republicans turned around and said, no, we want to increase military spending while cutting programs for the working class. So Biden and his team were like, no. And so that's where the talks last left off. That's where it last left off. So understand something, guys. I don't, for the life of me, see any path for a deal. I don't see a path because the Republicans originally wanted a 22% cut across the board in federal spending. Democrats were like, no, but we'll freeze federal spending. So we won't increase it, for the next however many years. And then you got into the fight over cut military spending versus no, cut programs for the poor. I don't see any conceivable path where the Democrats and the Republicans will agree. I mean, are you seriously going to get people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert on the same side as Jamal Bowman and Ilhan Omar I just don't see a path. I don't see that as possible. Are you going to get Bernie Sanders and John Fetterman on board with Ted Cruz? It's just, I don't see it. It's not going to happen. So, and if you do come up with some sort of deal that can appease the likes of Ted Cruz and Kevin McCarthy and Matt Gaetz, it's going to be a terrible deal, and the Democrats should vote it down anyway. So, look, what's the only path? It's to force Biden's hand and say, you're either going to print the coin, or mint the coin, excuse me, or you're going to use the 14th Amendment. That's it. That's the only way out of this. And I can't predict how this is going to go, but it's possible Biden comes up with some sort of a deal and tries to shove it down the throat of progressives, and many of them will cuck themselves and fall in line. That is definitely possible. But even under that sort of a scenario, you only need a few holdouts to make the whole thing go up in flames. So, and it'll definitely piss off the Democrats. So, I don't know. I mean, it feels like inevitable that we're going to get to a point where he has to act unilaterally. And that would be a good thing. But perhaps don't be weak up front. Like he has been saying, I'll take all of my leverage off the table. You only do that if you're an idiot or you secretly kind of want a bunch of cuts to social programs, which is just a standard Republican position. Either way, it's unacceptable. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.